like to ask you about what you said yesterday about Mr. Reagan. Does this represent a new turn in the campaign where you and he will take on each other directly, confront each other directly and personally?
It's not a question of personalities. It's a question of which candidate has the best policies, the best programs, which candidate is the one that's better qualified to do the job. And that's really the issue, what the people in Texas have to decide, and what the people throughout the rest of the country must decide. We've laid out our program, which is a very complete and a very detailed program, both at home and abroad, a program with a record, and my opponent is coming up with some rather simple, some rather lacking in detail answers, and I think the people in Texas must decide it on those policies rather on personalities.
Why did you not refer to him by name?
Well, that's sort of the tradition you do in politics.
Mr. President, Dick Roll, UPI. Mr. President, you said you'd welcome a battle in November between yourself and Senator Humphrey as providing a clear battle of issues and philosophy. What would be the nature of a battle in November between yourself and Jimmy Carter, especially in view of former Governor Carter saying that you have failed to provide leadership in all areas?
Well, if by chance former Governor Carter is the Democratic nominee, again, it'll be a challenge between a proven record on my part, where I think we've been very successful in taking a very bad economic situation and turning it around so that we're now on a stable and a constructive road to economic prosperity, and where our foreign policy, in my judgment, has been one of strength and success. It'll be a contest between Carter and Ford on a record and a challenger.
President Michael Morgan, KHOU-TV in Houston. When we were up to speak with you last week at the White House, you mentioned that you thought you would close the gap here in Texas between yourself and Mr. Reagan. Is this four-day campaign blitz by you close the gap even more?
I've been very, very encouraged by the wonderfully warm reception we received in Texas for the last 2 days, and I have met with a great many of my volunteer Ford people here in the state of Texas, and they're getting more and more enthusiastic. I find a good spirit and a determination, and the net result is I think we have closed the gap. We're making it very, very close, and I am always optimistic, and we certainly have generated a lot of momentum that I think could very well give us an opportunity to win. But we're working hard. We've got good leadership, good programs, good policies, and in the next 2 days we hope to enhance the possibilities of success on Saturday.
Mr. President, Walter Rogers representing the Associated Press. There's been a perceptible chill in U.S.-Soviet relations. You've dropped the word détente. Secretary Brezhnev's visit has been scrubbed, and there's no immediate prospect that the SALT II treaty will be signed. To what extent has the campaign been responsible for this very perceptible chill in U.S.-Soviet relations?
I haven't detected any significant change in the communications between the Soviet Union and the United States government. We're still working constructively and trying to find an answer to the limitations on strategic weapons. We're trying to work in every way that I know to keep the lid on any outbreaks throughout the world. We're certainly encouraged by the purchase by the Soviet Union yesterday of 3,400,000 metric tons of corn and grain, which I think is an indication of their living up to the agreements that we signed for a 5-year grain sale to the Soviet Union. I don't detect any deterioration in the constructive elements of a relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States.
Well, have what you called Mr. Reagan's superficial and simplistic charges done any damage internationally or abroad? And if not, why have they upset you so?
Well, because they're not a true picture of our military capability on the one hand And on the other, they could very well mislead our allies abroad and actually mislead some of our adversaries abroad. We have a comprehensive, I think, a very strong and fundamentally sound military program. And I can take credit for the fact that we apparently are able to reverse the trend that Congress imposed on previous presidents as to our military capability. The United States government, if my military program that I submitted in January is carried through, there won't be any doubt about the strong and effective capability of our defense program in the years ahead, so that the charges made by my opponent being lacking in depth, overly simplistic, have, in my judgment, at least created some problems potentially abroad because people might believe something that's inaccurate.
Mr. President, I'm Bart Cannon. I'm with the Houston News Service. Trying to keep up with your campaign around the country, I've noticed that you've made some political appointments in some primary states that you've gone to before you've gone there. You've also dropped some grants and some federal funds in those states. I'm trying to find out if you think the president should use that kind of influence to buy voters.
Well, that's a completely inaccurate allegation. The business of government has to continue. We can't stop making appointments. We can't stop agencies from awarding contracts or awards to cities or to states or to organizations just because a political campaign is in progress. The business of government has to proceed. And under no circumstances have any of these decisions been made in relationship to any primary.
Mr. President, Bill Broom of Ritter Newspapers. How are you? One of the key issues in this Texas Republican primary seems to be whether you're conservative enough. And some newspapermen think they've detected a shift toward the right in some of your policies and positions. Will this be a benefit or a handicap to you in the fall?
In the first place, Bill, the policies that I've carried out for the last 20 or 21 months in the White House have been the policies that I believed in the 25 years that I served in the Congress of the United States. They're middle-of-the-road policies both at home as well as abroad. And nothing that I've done, as far as I can analyze it, would indicate any shift in my basic philosophy or in the implementation of that philosophy. And I believe that being in the middle of the road as far as the Republicans are concerned on a nationwide basis is the right policy, and I know it's the right policy in meeting a Democratic challenger in November.
You are confident then that you're conservative enough to win in Texas, but middle of the road enough to win in the fall, is that right?
I think so.
All right.
Mr. President, David Glott with KTRK-TV in Houston. Why suddenly the attacks on Ronald Reagan openly? And secondly, are you saying that Ronald Reagan is, in effect, not fit to be President of the United States?
When I set forth our defense budget, when I carry out our foreign policy, it's predicated on an in-depth study before we make any decisions, where I consult with the best experts that we have within and without the government. And those policies have been successful, as I've indicated. And when they're challenged by oversimplified one-liners, in my opinion, those challenges have to be met head-on by specifics. And that's what I've tried to do on an impersonal basis. And that is what I'll do from now on, because this country deserves to know the facts in a complex and very difficult area, and you can't take just part of a problem and say, or come to a certain conclusion. You have to look at the broad spectrum. Now, some of those statistics that the former governor has used are statistics that we use in convincing the Congress to give to the president the kind of a defense budget that I have recommended. But in the process, he only takes a very small part of those statistics instead of presenting the total picture. And let me give you an example. In the strategic area, We have the most accurate, we have the most survivable ballistic missiles in the world. And at the same time, we have far, far more warheads, many more than the Soviet Union has. And in addition, we have in our strategic forces a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio over them in long-range, high-performance aircraft. So what you have to do is to take the total picture and not just a piece, which my opponent has done.
What about, do you feel, though, that Mr. Reagan is fit to be President of the United States?
Well, that's a judgment for the voters of Texas and the voters in the rest of the country to decide. It's really a question of which individual is the best qualified to be president, and in that context, I think my record of performance in office is the best judgment that the voters can make, and I think in the final analysis they'll make it for me and against someone who hasn't had the experience and the continuity in office.